Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to be taking a look at our new LiveToAir 12 solution. So, our LiveToAir 12 product will allow you to bring up to 12 remote guests into a professional video production. But before we get there, I'd like to welcome everybody to, if you have any comments, have any questions, just post them in the comment section below. Also, if you'd like to join us here on the show, we do have a link that will get you in, and somebody from the studio will get you on air with us. So we'd love to have you join us. So let's dive in because this is something we've sort of waited this entire season to do, and we've just started up Live to Air 12 in beta, and so I felt it was time to sort of share that with everybody here in the community. So let me give you a little bit of an overview of how live to air structurally works. So there are three components that are part of the workflow for live to air. So the first one is the guest interface. And what the guest interface allows you to do is to send out a single URL to every guest that you want. So it's the same URL to all of the guests. And when these guests connect, our backend distinguishes them, but it will give the guest a sense of where they are in the process. So right now, I have this connection here, and the guest knows they're the first person in the screening queue. So they know what's coming up. The flip to this is the next component, which is Call-in Manager. And what Call-in Manager does is it takes all of these incoming guests that have joined that link that you sent out to them, and it displays them as individual, what we call cue cards. So these are the guests queuing up to become part of a show. Live to air, in the workflow, live to air depends on this Call-in Manager capability to onboard guests and bring them into our Live to Air 12 solution. But we have a lightweight version that I'll show you a bit later baked into the Live to Air. But this gives you a lot of capabilities. It lets you do the screening of guests. You can check all of their attributes, their video connections, their media devices before you send them over. And it's browser based, so it can be run from any system that you need to. This means that you can do tech checks and other things with it well in advance, because whoever is doing the tech check only needs to have a browser available, and then you know you'd be good. So the last piece is the Live to Air 12 system itself. Now, the first two pieces that we talked about were browser based. Live to Air is an application. So this either will run in Windows or it will run in AWS. So you can run it as an instance up in AWS. And so this gives you a sense of the UI that we have here. And overall, it's designed to allow multiple guests to be selected and brought into a production, and to give you, based on whatever guest is selected, all the controls you need to manage these guests. So now's the point at this. Let me jump in and see what we have for comments, and then I'll go back to the beginning and we'll sort of show the whole process in action here. So we have Rudy is joining us. So Rudy, good evening to you. We've been excited about this for the entire season. So thank you for joining us for this. So we have Ryan. Ryan, great to have you here. A big fan of the work you do. So thank you for joining us here. So we have Randall Packer. Randall, thank you. Randall, as I've mentioned before, does some incredible stuff on the creative side. Really, a cutting edge artist, and definitely somebody to look up. So we have David Ramirez from Costa Rica. David, thank you for taking the time to join us. Great having you here. We have, let me say, I guess it was George Bass from Germany. So yes, George, thank you for joining us. And I remember, pronounce it like baseball. So your mnemonic memory trick helped me this time. So thank you. So we have Indy wishing us a bonjour. Uh, and we also have Peter F. from Berlin. So, Peter, great to have you here again. Thank you. Uh, we have Ovidu. So, hopefully, I am saying your name correctly, Ovidu. So, joining us from Bucharest. So, thank you very much. We appreciate you dropping in here. We have Guy. Guy, always great to have you here. Thanks for making the time. Uh, we have Ken from Northern California. Ken, thank you. Great having you. And then we have American Newscape. So howdy back to you, American Newscape. Thank you. All right. So let me jump into this again and sort of move through the actual process of bringing a guest on. So if you remember when we started, we were over here and this is the guest interface. And this guest is coming in to us. Let me switch over to Call Manager. So they are the guest right at the top. So this is Daniel Marks. And so when Daniel comes into Call Manager, what we can do is we can select them. So we have all these guests that have come in. So you can select the guests we want. And at that point, we click the green connect button. And so now what we have here is a connection from Daniel. And if I got something talking to me here. So uh, let me just try to do this quickly then. So Daniel is seeing the operator and the operator sees Daniel. You have the ability to see all the technical details about the connection you have with Daniel here. So this means that you can look at, let me go back here. You can look at their resolutions, the IP addresses coming in, the codecs being used to encode this, the bandwidth you have in and out that this connection is occupying. And one of the other things, which is really, really useful, is we actually, if the guest is using a Chromium-based browser, we will show you whether they are wired using Ethernet or whether they're coming in wireless. Because we know that everybody always comes back and says, "Oh yeah, I'm wired," but we also know that many times that's not the case. So this gives you a great way to sort of check on that. And then we also have all of the latency, for what would be, you know, basically the quality of line statistics here for audio playback and video playback. So that's all here, and it gives you that security that this connection is solid for the guest. You also have the ability to know exactly what the guest is connecting on. So we know they're coming in on Windows 10 with Chrome, and I know all of their media devices. But not only do I know what the media devices are, I can go in and I could change them to any other media device that corresponds to that category on their system. So if they had multiple webcams, I can swap that, multiple speakers, all of that's possible. So you have that. And the last thing here is you have the ability visually to frame them, because we know that a lot of people are doing multi-box shots, and this gives you a easy way to position them inside the frame to make sure they look good. On the bottom, we have all the metadata that's going to be associated with that guest. We can fill this in and make sure all of it's correct and then leverage it further downstream inside of LiveToAir. So we publish this metadata. So, okay, so we have a guest right now. So let me disconnect here. So, and I'm told we have Randall has joined us. Randall.
Greetings.
Greetings. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. So thank you for calling in.
Yeah, I couldn't resist joining you in the new system. It's really very exciting.
So we're pretty excited about it too. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to say hello And I don't know if you want me to ask any questions now or wait till later.
No, if you have specific questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'd also love if you wanted to share anything about some of the things that you're doing because you've got live to air embedded into the framework of some of the art that you create. So that might be interesting to some people as well.
Sure. Well, happy to share. Well, I'm an artist who works with media and performance, and I'm in my what I call my underground studio bunker right here in Washington D.C. And it's a little dark around me. I should have turned up the lights a little bit more so you could actually see what's going on here. But essentially, we've been using Live to Air now for about a year, and I have we're using it for live performance. And so we're bringing in guests remotely from different locations, and we are putting them into a virtual stage environment. So we're all set up here to create composited, uh, taking all the feeds via NDI and then compositing them and using backgrounds and foregrounds and both video and graphics. And so we're able to essentially create an internet streaming performance, situating live performers from different locations into a virtual set. And we've been doing this quite extensively since I've been doing performance long before the pandemic, but we have definitely picked up our work quite a bit since the pandemic started. And you know, the whole theater world and music and performance was completely shut down. Now it's trying to reopen, but it's been a really difficult period for the performing arts. And so we got a grant from in the UK to train artists to who work in traditional theater, who work in physical theater spaces. We are training them to use the internet as a medium for live performance. And so essentially that's what we've been doing: workshops, we do live performance, we also do panel discussions, and our group is called the Third Space Network. So and just so everybody knows what that means, I think it'd be interesting to this group is that so John, in relation to the two of us, I'm in the first space, you're remote from me, so you're in the second space, and together we are in the third space, which is the shared network space. So it's a way of conceptualizing the spatial environment that we are in together through the network. So anyway, I don't want to take up all your time, but that's a pretty good overview.
So no, thank you for that. I mean, the amazing thing always is that society shapes art and art shapes society. So the two interact. And
Yeah.
so, in a lot of ways, what you're doing is you are evolving the art based on the realities of the moment. And I think that's actually exciting because I think everybody here, whether it's art or whether people are just in the creative space of sort of producing and streaming, everybody's had to adapt and sort of adjust. But a lot of people have ended up at a much better space from this. You know, they are now doing things they didn't do before and having more potential opportunities for different things they can bring. So it's cool to just see how the two interact all the time.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens when the pandemic is over, if it's ever over, because I think that so many people have discovered the internet as a medium for communication, for sharing events with family and friends, and web conferencing and so forth. That I mean, of course, you and I and many others were doing this before the pandemic, but I think since the pandemic began, it's become just a mainstream medium to be web conferencing. So I think that this has elevated um, the kind of work that we do and that you do to a whole new level. That and it's really now embedding itself into all kinds of different professions, and not just the performing arts, but in education. I mean, academia was always kind of on the periphery of this, and now it's all the kids are growing up learning how to go to school online. And so it's just transforming the world around us. So I want to thank you, John, for all the incredible work that you do with Live to Air. And I want everybody to know just how amazing and serious the work that you're doing. It's quite extraordinary. So I'm so appreciative
Well,
of
Rando,
what you have done.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate that, and it's I'm just the face of a lot of other people that do a lot of very hard and creative work. So,
Yeah.
on their behalf, I thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for having me on the show, and I look forward to the rest of it.
Absolutely, thank you, Randolph, for calling in. I appreciate it.
Okay. Take
Take care.
care.
All right, so that was nice to get to talk to Randall, and he's like you heard from that. He's really pushing boundaries with combining the electronic media and the arts. So definitely somebody to look up. So let me just sort of jump back here, and we'll pick up the workflow here. So if you remember, I had Daniel connected here. We had at this point, Daniel was all dialed in. And so the last thing we need to do here with all of the metadata and the media set is we can click to send Daniel over to the studio. So when we do that, Daniel now disappears from the queue on the left side, the inbound queue, and you can see that he's in our in studio queue. But what's really cool now is if we switch over to live to air, you'll also see that Daniel's sitting over here in our live to air inbound queue. So in live to air, we have the ability to do some of the things you saw in call-in manager here. So we give you the ability to create shows and to, invite guests and do all those things that we have in call-in manager. Uh, and you can actually work with them here. We have an inbound queue. So those were all the remaining guests and the studio queue. So you have the ability to do what you saw there just on a more streamlined scale for bringing in guests. So if you didn't want to have two different screens or two different operators, Live to Air now with LiveToAir 12 will let you do all of that in a single interface. So let's jump in and take a closer look at this interface here. So if you look on the right-hand side, we'll really start here. These are the channels that we have available. So when we connect the guest gets placed in one of these channels, and when you select that guest channel, the rest of this interface is going to adapt to all the settings for that particular guest. And so you can see here that let's actually, so we'll connect Daniel here to connect him to channel 1. So I just double click. Now you can see I've picked Daniel up in channel 1, and it's ramping up the connection quality to do that. And now you see all the details that are associated with Daniel now. So you have all the metadata. That was everything we set up in call-in manager. You also have access to all of the media devices. So if somewhere in the middle of the show you needed to change, or say they were doing a PowerPoint presentation, you wanted to change the camera from their video to a screen capture, you could do those types of things. And that's all baked into here. And now you also see all the audio levels, because we have a lot of audio capabilities baked in around what we can do with guests. And I'll get into that in a moment. So in addition to all this information around the guests, where you see their preview, you also have the ability to basically sort of zoom and pan in on the guest. So say I wanted to have a tighter shot of Daniel's face. I can just take and move this around, and I can do that for each one of the guests I bring in to create something that basically has similar positioning and framing for everybody that we're bringing in to a show. So that's just a handy way to do it, and it's a visual way. So you don't have to sort of type in offsets or anything. You just take and put in the person, sizing them up to make sure they fit in the slot that you want to position them in when you combine everything in your production. So in addition to things that you would do specifically with the guest, you can also see the things that you can send back to the guest. And so we have two main things. We have the feed that a guest is going to receive when they're first connected. And so when a guest first connects, we say that they are off air. We are not necessarily sending a video feed and audio feed out to the studio, and the way their audio is routed can be different. So right now, what we have down here is the off-air return video feed that the guest is going to be receiving. And up here is the on-air guest video, the video the guest will receive when they're in on-air mode. And we can switch the guests between on-air and off-air right over here. So this is worth showing. So if I switch back to the guest interface now, so right now the guest is off air. If I click the on air button, what the guest will see happen is they'll get a notification that they are on air, and they'll see a red bar beside their name. And not only that, but the the connection with this guest now changes the video source. So we went from the off-air video feed to the on-air video feed. So if I switch back to off-air, you now will see we do the reverse. We give a clear off-air indicator to the guest, and we show them a green bar. And while we're over here, there's one more thing. When a guest is off-air, you could have the operator cut in and talk to this guest. And that's something we have called push to talk. So when I do push to talk, I can click on and talk to this guest one-on-one. And when they are off air, what this guest will see is the operator video. So we have 3 video sources that can potentially go back to the guest. A video for when they're off air, whatever feed you want, a video for when they're on air, and an operator feed. So you can have that one-to-one. Now, if the guest were on air at this point in time, I'll switch off push to talk, and now we're back to the off air. So if the guest were on air at this point in time, push to talk would work just like your normal IFB, where the guest would hear you, but they would continue seeing the on-air video. So it keeps by recognizing on-air versus off-air, you have the ability to work appropriately when you want to talk to that guest, either with video or simply as an IFB. And we give you that capability here. The other piece to this is that we have different ways to manage audio in LiveToAir. And in our original LiveToAir product, we did what was called an automated mix minus. We could take all the guest audio and we could combine it into 4 individual feeds. So guest 1 would hear the audio from guest 2, 3, and 4 and the studio, but not their own, and so on for each one of the 4 guests. We have now taken this a step further. And what we let you do is you can set up any guest into any number of different mix minus groups. So say you needed to have panelists, and maybe there would be crew that you'd have. So you could have the crew all have one mix minus group, and they could all be talking because they're switching or producing remotely. And you could have the panelists all working as another group, and they would hear each other independently. And that gives you that very sophisticated setup capability. But not only that, we allow you to set up these mix minus groups for both on air and off air. So say you wanted to simulate breakout rooms. You could turn around and say, when I have all my guests on air, they all can hear each other. And that's great. But when I switch to off air, I want to have them assigned to maybe 3 different groups, where I could have a group that's going to be, discussing different, groups that could be discussing different issues. So you can use on air and off air for a lot of different things. And that's one of them, that sense where I can let people separate into different groups and then combine them again to round out a discussion. So all that's baked into the way we manage audio in LiveToAir. And again, because this is all set up, let me just go and show you the settings, which will give you a little bit more insight into how all this would come together. So Well, let me start over here. If you've worked with LiveToAir, you know that we have two different groups, two different logins for your call-in manager and for your LiveToAir. So we let you enter both of those in here because, as I mentioned, LiveToAir now has call-in manager capabilities baked into it. I also mentioned that we have the ability for the operator to be seen and heard by the guests who push to talk. And so this is where you'd set all of that information up for the operator. For the video, we now have a lot more going on with video. So we allow you to send out the video as NDI. But in addition to NDI, you can also set it, and I don't think I have anything set up here for this, but you could also set it so you could send it out via SDI if you had Decklink, Blackmagic Decklink hardware. So that means you could have both NDI and SDI streaming video simultaneously for each individual guest. In addition, you can say, I want the guest video to go out even when they're off air. So this gives you, you can turn around and say, I really don't want to send guest video out when they're off air because I want to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And that would be great. But you may have cases where you want that guest video because, say, you're going to set up a green room for the guests. So when the guests go off air, you can take that video and create a branded green room in something like OBS or vMix. So that would give you that possibility. And you can switch it all off, on and off for every guest or individual guest. So we have that capability, and you get to set what's my output resolution for each one of these guests and what are the video returns. We mentioned there are two video returns. You have the on air and the off air. Well, you can do this for each guest individually. So if you wanted different guests to see different videos on air and off air, or you wanted everybody to see the same video off air but different video on air, all that's available to you here. And you can set those up here. NDI, SDI, anything that would be recognized as a video source, we let you route that in. And then we also have the resolution of the return video to guest. And normally you'd say, hey, I want the highest, but maybe you're running LiveToAir12 on a system that's a little less powerful. You could turn around and say, gee, I'm going to switch this over to work at 720 for both my ins and outs because I would rather more guests. But if you have fewer guests, you could turn around and say, I want it to be 1080. Or if you had a really powerful system, everything could be 1080 back and forth all the time. The other thing we have that can help with system performance is we now let you select different hardware for encoding and decoding or do it in software. So right now I'm set up to do it in software, but I could actually have NVENC and NVDEC working here and use this for different sorts of video cards. So if I had Quadros, I could set all of these inputs and outputs to work on the Quadro card because they have unlimited encodes and decodes. But you also can have multiple GPUs in your system. So if you wanted to turn around and say, yes, I have two lower end GPUs, you could do that and use both of them if they're Quadros to do encodes. And that takes loads off the CPU. So a lot of capability the way we have this set up in doing your video. The other thing we have, which I mentioned, was that we have the ability to set up different mix minus groups. And here's an example of how some of this can work together. So we have right now basically 4 groups that we set up. So you have one which could be a group for all our panelists, maybe a group for all the panelists and the assistants together. So like when they're off air, they want to be hearing their, PR people and their maybe compliance people if it's something that requires that. So you could have this set up so people would break out that way. You could have one for the crew, and you could have something which is set up for everybody. In addition to being able to have these as mix minus groups for how the audio gets routed, we also let you take and send those out as an aggregate feed of everybody in that group. So this means that if you wanted to put this into a mixer, but you didn't have channels for 12 individual guests, you could turn around and just say, I'm just going to take audio feeds out for these individual groups. And if you're using something like we have here, Dante Virtual Sound Card, you could set that up. 'Cause right now we support Windows device model with this, but we're working on ASIO support. So that's on our punch list of things to get done. But this will let you now take and do this all over IP. So very, very powerful for these types of things. But in addition, say you want a 24 guest, you could run two of these and use an aggregate feed from system one to push audio from that system into system two and from system two into system one. So now the guests across all 24 channels can all hear each other and interact. So a lot of flexibility with these mixed minus groups, and you get to name them. So you can keep track and you don't have to remember them by number alone. And if we come and look at what we have over here in the audio section, you can now see that we have NDI audio. You can also output through a second audio device. You could do NDI and Dante, NDI and WDM based audio interfaces, anything like that. And you can have a different audio return for your off-air and on-air, things that we mentioned. And here is where you end up seeing how the mix minus groups can work. So I can have everybody, this guest is going to be in the all group when they are switched off air, and they are going to be in the panel group when they're switched on air. So you have this flexibility now to do this. And you can see these are all the different mix minus groups we have available. So again, another way to make things a little more flexible and extend the types of productions you can do with LiveToAir. And finally, we have voice optimization enabled or disabled. So this will allow you to apply echo cancellation and any type of thing that will sort of built into browsers normally. This gives you the ability to turn that on and off, because sometimes it helps, but sometimes you can get better audio when you switch it off. And so for each channel, you can turn this or optimization on and off. So the last thing that I want to talk about over here is we have an advanced tab here. And there are a lot of things. This logging is all about anything that we want to do. If you needed to debug something with us, we can tell you what to turn on. But the other thing, which is really interesting, because we talked about the metadata and having that metadata available for all these guests, which when you get up to 12 guests can make a difference to have that organized in some way. What we do is we let you write this out into a file, whether that's on a network drive or a local drive, but you can write this metadata out to a file and leverage that. So if you're using vMix, you can use that inside of vMix to create titles and lower thirds. You can work with data link on the TriCaster, or you can just pull it out and use it in anything else, New Blue, Title, or anything else you want. But that data now becomes available, and I'll show you that in a second. We also have the ability to put different color bars in, and for a lot of people, they want to do things that are branded and look like their studio setup, their studio branding is. So we give you the ability to just change the image. So those color bars that you see over here, you can set those up to be anything. And these things flow out even when there's no guest is connected. So that means that when these videos are all here, if you want to take and crop them and look at them downstream, like you're setting this up inside your switcher, you'll get video channels coming out with all these channels and the name and the number of the channel without having a guest connected. So it lets you crop and set it all up and make sure you got the right places, the right feeds going to the right places downstream. So that's a good high-level view of everything. One other thing I did want to show here is what the metadata looks like. So if you look here, this is a copy of the metadata file that we create. And so we have metadata for all 12 channels here. And you can see for the first one, we know everything from the status. So we know the guest is off air. That's their name. That's their email, phone. We have notes in here. We have they're in different groups, which is something we didn't really talk about with call and manager. You can group people and make that easy to manage them. Uh, and location. So this metadata is all available and can be picked up by any program. In addition, uh, it changes dynamically. So let me say, I actually want to say, oh, their location is wrong here. So I can go in here and say, they're actually from New York, New York. So we're just going to go and change that. So I just click and save that. And now if I change this over here, if we go over here now, you can see that this has changed and the location is updated. So this could be changed here in LiveToAir, but it could also be changed over in Call-in Manager. And that means that you could have somebody else working remotely as an operator and do certain things that maybe you don't want to tie people that are working in the studio, have them tied up doing those. So a lot of flexibility around this. So that's the big overview here. There's a lot more subtlety and detail behind this, but we just wanted to give you a sense of what types of productions you could do and the tool sets that we offer here to let you do them. So before we wrap up for the main show, let me go back and see what else we have here is coming in as questions. So Randall was just asking, how do you get chat into LiveToAir? So that's a question we actually get a lot. Uh, right now, and this is, we do not have chat baked into LiveToAir, but it is on our sort of list of features to add in the future. We know that it could be really useful, especially if you don't want to necessarily talk to somebody, but simply give them a message on screen. So that's something we've been thinking about how to implement well, and sort of stay tuned on that one, because that's probably something that will be in a future release. So we also have Bill Mew. So let's see. Bill is saying hello from Tunbridge Wells in the UK. Bill, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you taking your Friday night and watching us here. So thank you. So we have Torture CH, and Torture, hello. Thank you for joining us. It's always good to see you here. So Bill Mew is asking, what are the hardware and OS requirements? So that's a great question, because there's a couple of things. So I showed the 12 channel version. We also have a 6 channel version. So we have a 6 channel and a 12 channel. For the 12 channel version, what we're showing here, we are recommending a 12 core CPU and a P4000 GPU, which is a Quadro GPU. So with those two, that will give you a lot of overhead that you can, in terms of capability. So you should be able to use everything pretty much that we looked at here at all at 1080 resolution. And that's, we think, something that, is a good recommended spec if you are building this from scratch. But you could also run on lower end hardware. You can run on 8-core systems. You could run with like a P2200. You may need to configure certain things if you wanted to use all 12 guests to, be slightly lower resolutions. Uh, but in doing that, you have, a lot of flexibility. So you can turn around and say, I love having 12 and everybody has 720 if I need them for production, but I know that I can do 6 or 8 people at 1080 on my hardware. So it gives you that flexibility to configure what works best around the hardware. For our 6-channel system, we normally recommend an 8-core and a P2200. That's our normal spec for what we ship. And we think that's, that's a reasonably priced and, strong alternative for doing it that way. But again, lower end hardware with slightly lower resolutions on these things. And again, that can work for you. Everything here is Windows 10. So we set this up Windows 10 Pro. Will work on standard Windows 10. We're not recommending people jump to Windows 11 quite yet, but hopefully that answers the key questions here. So let's see. So I'm sorry if I'm missing some of these. 'Cause there's more coming in than I can keep up with here. So let's see. So uh, we have America Newscape is saying this is absolutely amazing. America, thank you. We appreciate that. So Randall Packer says, "What are you doing now?" So in terms of if that's about the hardware that we have here. Oh, so I'm sorry. So Renda was asking how we, now I understand. So Renda was asking how to bring messaging into live to air. He was asking how we're doing the messaging on screen. So we're using vMix Social to do the messages that we pull up from comments. So vMix Social is available from, as far as I know, the minimum vMix you can purchase all the way up to the highest end. And it's there and it works as an independent application. So you can go through, I believe it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, IRC, and there might be something else, though I'm not sure. But that will cover pretty much the main ways that people would be doing commenting. And that lets you then take them and feed them into as basically as XML into lower thirds that can be displayed on screen. So that's how that's done. So I apologize, I didn't understand the question in the beginning. So let's see. So David Ramirez says, is it possible to share my screen and camera at the same time? Currently, the only way we have to do that is to open up a second tab inside of your remote guest and have one be for your desktop and the other be for your camera. To do that, you would need to make one tab sort of a private tab so they don't interfere with each other. But that would let you, it's pretty straightforward to do. It would take two channels in live to air, but it should be a fairly straightforward way to do that combined. But you can, as I said, switch between the two. And either the guest or the live to air operator can make that change between the cameras. And that's part of when I showed that you have the drop down and access to control. You can do that from either side. So let's see. What else do we have? So does it have BitFocus companion integration? Bill Mew is asking that. At this point, we do not. We we are very keen on adding some level of automation to this, especially given the uh, the number of channels that people were dealing with. It isn't here yet, and I I I ask everybody's indulgence with some of these feature set requests. We are really looking at getting this launched. And over the first 3 months of next year, we're expecting to launch in January. And so over the next 3 months, we really are going to be focusing much more on making sure this all rolls out smoothly, making some backend changes we want to make to help with some of the extended functionality we want in the future. And probably in the second quarter, we're going to start to look at rolling in some of these new features. And we know automation is one of them. We know that Osio support for uh, Dante is another one, and these are ones that are high on the list. And also the ability to do messaging, which probably isn't as high on the list as those, but definitely in the mix of features we want to add. So let's see. So is the deck link limited to 1080 59 64? It right now in live to air, we because we're working with what we see as sort of remote guest cameras, which are typically lower res and coming off of WebRTC, we limit the outputs up. We have the outputs go up to 1080 30p. So that will give you 2997. So that will give you sort of that standard HD level, not the 3G level. So that's definitely something that we could extend in the future as bandwidth and people's cameras on the remote ends would be increased. But right now, that's sort of the limit down to the lowest resolution supported in SDI, which would just be a standard definition resolution, probably 640 by 360, sort of the widescreen. So let's see. Can we use source codes to improve upon? Uh, so right now, we don't have the ability because if we had ways to control this, we would have sort of the ability to do extensions. There really isn't any extendability into uh, the live to air system right now. So hopefully this is something that we covered all the key things and there won't be a lot of production need for that. But if we're missing features in here that are important, please just let us know. We definitely would love to hear about that. And let's see. So we have Davis. This looks like easier than an SRT connection. So David, there's a couple of things. Uh, SRT is one direction. So if you make an SRT connection with somebody remotely, you need to have a connection back to them to give them a feed, both audio and video. So you could have this as a conversation. The other thing about SRT is it does need port forwarding on at least one side of the connection. And typically this does not, given where a lot of the technology has gone over the past sort of year and a half, a lot more people are open to WebRTC and their firewalls and other things. So we're finding that the connectivity is simpler than setting up something with SRT. And certainly structurally, this just works with a browser. So it can work on a mobile device or a desktop device, Mac, PC. So you don't have the same limitations. SRT is an application that has to be deployed remotely as well. So in doing that, you don't, when using LiveToAir, it is just browser based. So it makes that pretty straightforward in terms of bringing on guests, and especially for like what we do here, where we just have people call in. Having that ability is great when it's all browser based, and they don't have to download anything on the remote end. So Bill Mew is asking if we're looking to make it available for Mac OS. We are looking at we have one of the new M1 MacBook Pros here in house. One of our developers is working with that, and we are sort of awestruck by the price value proposition in those systems. Unfortunately, we are built around DirectX and CUDA, which are really Windows centric technologies right now. So it is something we would consider, but it is not going to be something that would happen near term. And I apologize because I know we have a fair number of Mac users out there. So that isn't something I can give you sort of this immediate, yep, just wait 6 months and we'll show you something great. It's not going to be that type of time frame, but it is something we're keeping an eye on because the capabilities inside of Metal and inside the CPUs that Apple is building, those ARM-based CPUs, with a lot of built-in smarts and encoding baked in, uh, it's something we definitely are keeping an eye on because it could be exciting for us at some point in the future. So let's see. So Mady, color correction is essential in my opinion. So Mady, uh, that's a fair point. The question for us, and this is right now, if I go up here, we do give you, let me just switch over to the LiveToAir interface for a second here. Uh, we do give you the ability to do some basic stuff, so gamma and contrast. So while not color correction, and I'm not pretending it does give you some level of video-based, connection to try to, dial in blacks and create, a better balance in the image. We do not, though, have color correction baked into this at this point in time. Something we're considering. It's more complicated, to be honest, in terms of scope of projects than some of the other things we talked about. But I appreciate what you're saying. The other thing that we found, and this is, we're very open to feedback on this, is that most of the switches, since this isn't a switching application, most of the switchers that we're dealing with have some basic color correction baked into them, whether that's whether that's vMix or uh, anything in the TriCaster family. So hopefully, that will cover you for the areas where just the grosser, less refined gamma and contrast corrections won't help. But I hear you on that, and I appreciate that as feedback. So Randall, so he says, I hope I haven't asked too many questions, but what is the audio bandwidth? Is it stereo? And is it possible to increase it for musical performances? So the the full let me start with the easy one. So we're using Opus. So Opus does have a lot of uh, capabilities for setting it up. Right now, I don't believe we have a mechanism to let you change the frequency response, but that is something I would definitely look into. Now probably have one of our technical guys is probably going, oh, I could tell you right away. So if there is an answer, somebody can feed it to me. I'll be happy to give you on the ability to adjust that. Uh, in terms of stereo, we have a new version of the front end that will be coming out shortly that will allow you to select, like basically shut things off in the for all the audio correction and take the raw audio in full stereo into LiveToAir. And we do stereo return if you shut off the optimization, voice optimization. You shut that off inside of the LiveToAir audio. That should give you a stereo return back as well. So you can optimize the audio in both directions. But right now, we don't have that release. That will be coming out as part of our rollout, but it isn't going to be day one. So we're trying to stage what we do. But very fair question there. All right, then. So why don't we call that a wrap for today's show? We will jump to the post show and we can carry on the conversation. If there are any other questions, I'd be happy to talk about anything here or anything streaming in general. But I would like to just have a sort of a quick get together if anybody's around, and basically sort of a end of season two / holiday party. And it would be great to talk to people if you're around. But if you can't be, please know everybody here. We celebrate Christmas here, but whatever holiday you celebrate, definitely would love to wish you a very happy one, peaceful and restful with family. So uh, till the after show, if you're going to stick around, we'll see you in a second. Otherwise, see you next week. Take care, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the post show. So we had a couple of questions that I didn't get to here. So the first one is Bill was asking if you can run LiveToAir12 and vMix on a single PC. So right now we are. So our setup here is a one PC with vMix and LiveToAir running. I don't know how far you could push this. So we're doing this sort of in a limited demo mode, but definitely this would be something you could do. Certainly for 4 or 6 if the system were powerful enough. But this would be something we'd have to measure and get a bit more feedback from the community to see what they're running on. The other piece though is we do run in AWS, so you could run like a G4DN 8X large instance if you can get them on AWS, and that would let you run it. So even if you don't have the hardware local, it is something you could deploy in the cloud as well. So if you run vMix and LiveToAir in AWS, that's another packaging sort of deployment option for LiveToAir. So let's see. So George Bass said, thanks again for a great show. George, thank you. I appreciate you spending time with us here. So let's see. Ken Benedict is asking MSRP. So for the LiveToAir 6, it's $799 US. But anybody that has LiveToAir already or buys LiveToAir prior to LiveToAir 6 and 12 launching in January, LiveToAir costs $499, and we will give everyone that purchases LiveToAir or has purchased LiveToAir a free upgrade to LiveToAir 6. LiveToAir 12 is $1499, $1,499 US. And that should give you, and you can also upgrade for $700 from LiveToAir 6 to LiveToAir 12. So let's see. Let's see. Randall is asking about if he can drop on. Unfortunately, I'm just getting told we're having internet problems here. So I'm going to have to wrap this up. But Randall, if you want, why don't you just connect with me outside of this, and we'll cover this. So sorry for the short post show, everyone, but thank you so much for joining us here. Wonderful holidays to all of you. And if we can, we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.